really on what supports an awful lot of values in multifamily, and that is rents and the direction of rents, especially if we have, I almost hate to say this R word, a different R word, a recession, because it seems like this thing has been around the corner forever. I know historically that rents are quite resilient in a recession, something that you touched on earlier. Back even during the 2008 global financial crisis, when I was a landlord, I owned fourplex buildings then, I noticed that I had a pretty good steady stream of renters. My rents didn't really go up much, but they were really resilient. They didn't go down, and that's because people couldn't get a loan. So that was an affordability problem then. We have another affordability problem now, but if we do tilt into recession, what do you think that is going to do to rents?
We are going to see a decline in rents if a recession happens. Now, that's a question, by the way. 6 months ago, if you told me a recession wasn't going to happen, I'd say, no, that's not possible. We are going to go into a recession. However, I must admit that the U.S. economy has truly outperformed beyond anyone's imagination. So today, the chances of a recession are certainly not 100%, might be 50%. But let's assume that it happens and a recession happens. I think what is very likely is that this recession will be very short. So once again, if you're not paying attention to what's happening in the marketplace, this is a time. I was born in India and this is my adopted country. I feel very proud of the US economy today. If I compare the US economy to the Canadian, the Eurozone, the Germans, the Japanese, we are outperforming every one of those economies. We're at the point where we're outperforming China, which almost never happens, by the way. So we have an extraordinarily resilient and strong economy at this point. So if it falls into a recession just because the Fed keeps hitting it over the head with this interest rate hammer, I think that recession will be fairly short. Because as soon as the economy does go into a recession, the Fed usually figures that out within a few months. Then they can stop hitting us with a hammer. I'm not saying that they'll just cut interest rates back to zero, but they certainly will provide some cushion. Maybe they cut rates by 1 time, 2 times, just to make the market breathe a little bit easier. Because this is an artificial recession. There is no shortage of demand in the US economy. There's an incredible number of open jobs. There were as many as 11 million jobs. Now there's about 9 million open. And wage growth has been so strong, right? Because we have so many people retiring that at this point, for the first time since the early 60s, I believe, or late 60s, we actually have pricing power. So anyone who wants to be employed can ask for more money and get it. And so wage growth has been about 4.5%, which is really good for rents, by the way. It's phenomenal news because we needed wage growth for future rent growth. So we have a artificial recession if it does happen. And that artificial recession is being caused by the Fed because they want that wage growth to come closer to 2% from the 4% that it's at, because everything else has come down, right? So commodities have come down with the exception of oil. So the supply chain issues are gone. Rents are down. So in the US, the last 12 months, rents were flat. And in some markets, they might be down 1% or 2%. Austin, I think, was the only market that was down a lot. But most other markets were down very small amounts. So rents have been flat, which is really credible because if you look at rents over the last 2 years, they're up 16%. So in 2022, they were up 16%. In 2023, they were up basically 0. So if you average that out, now you're looking at 8% rent growth, which is phenomenal compared to the long-term average of 2.5%. So we've been outperforming on rent and we needed to take a breather, and the last 12 months have been that breather. Now, if the recession happens, I do expect rents to go down, but normally they don't. So in a 6-month average recession, the average US recession is 2 quarters, so 6 months. Normally you don't get rent drops. You might get, the rents plateau out, or maybe their rent growth drops from 3% to 1%. That's much more common. This time, we might see rent growth in a short recession drop by maybe 1% or 2%. And the biggest reason for that is supply. The largest supply of apartments in the history of the country is delivering starting basically the beginning of 2023 until the end of 2024. So these 2 years, 2023 and 2024, are massive apartment supply years. And obviously, as you supply 500,000 apartments into an economy that overall is not outperforming, is doing okay, and it starts to go into a recession, then you're going to see some concessions. And that concession drives down the price of multifamily, which then drives down the price of single-family rentals. So we could see a decline in rents. I'd say probably 1% to 2% is possible, but that decline is likely to be short. So let's assume that the recession starts in the final quarter of 2023, which might not happen. I think it's more of a Q1 and Q2 of next year. If the recession does happen, those are the 2 most likely quarters. As soon as the economy rebounds and becomes positive, we should see very stable rent growth for the rest of 2024. By 2025, a lot of that incoming supply is done. So now supply and demand are in balance. So in 2025, I expect strong rent growth as much as 4 or 5%. And in 2026, I expect very, very strong rent growth. We might see 6% rent growth in 2026. So 2024 is that year where rent growth's a little bit shaky because of this R word, the recession word, and whether it happens or not is we don't know. And when it happens, we don't know how long it lasts. But I think because it's an artificially induced recession, it's likely to be the vanilla US 6-month recession, which basically drives wages closer to that 2% target for the Fed and gives the Fed the room to start easing up on interest rates.
Recessions are not good. Perhaps the one positive about a recession is that then we can all stop talking about and speculating upon when it does eventually happen, because on average it does happen every 5 years. It's just a normal part of the business cycle.
You can watch this one next.